So, welcome back to this next panel, this next discussion on the future of European security in a geopolitically contested world. I think a very appropriate discussion as the security landscape all around Europe is changing very rapidly. I think for many years already, Europeans are talking about an ambitious foreign and security policy. I remember, for instance, already in 2003, how High Representative Javier Solana was talking about a ring of well-governed states in Eastern Europe, but also in the Mediterranean. And today, also the words of Ursula von der Leyen that is aiming for a geopolitical commission. So we definitely don't have a lack of ambitions and goals in that respect. But what we do observe today, nevertheless, is that there is a multiplication of crises around Europe. And perhaps by times, Europe is definitely struggling to address these challenges. And I think it doesn't only materialize in external crises, think for instance about the war in Ukraine, but these external threats also come to live inside the European Union sometimes. I mean, just think about the murder of 2 Swedish citizens earlier this week in Brussels by the Islamist extremists. There again, there's a clear geopolitical link to the events in the Middle East. So I think some of the questions that we want to try to answer today on this panel is about taking stock of Europe as a geopolitical actor, success stories, things that we could do better, the role of Europe also in a world where Pax Americana is perhaps increasingly being challenged. How does Europe deal with powerful autocracies? Russia, China, Iran, these countries benefit from Western globalization, but at the same time they also try to dismantle our liberal democratic world order. And also, for sure, how does Europe push back on these autocracies that pursue regional hegemony? Russia's war in Ukraine, China threatening Taiwan, and Iran's nuclear policy and support for terrorist proxies. So that, in a nutshell, is what we want to talk about today. Fortunately, I don't have to answer these difficult questions myself. I'm being joined by an exquisite panel of experts and practitioners. On my very right side, Sławomir Debski from the Polish Institute of International Affairs. We have Ian Bond from the Center for European Reform. We had Alvaro Imbernon from the Spanish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, European Union and Cooperation of Spain. And we're also being joined online, welcome as well, Alexandre Escorcia from the Ministry of Armed Forces of France.
Can you hear me? Hello, can
we
you
hear you very well, we see you as well. So welcome in Riga as well, even though online, but we see and hear you very well. Welcome. So we have a limited time for this session, about 60 minutes, so we'll get straight to the point. And Alexandre, let me perhaps start with you, since you're with us online. So earlier today we heard the president of Latvia saying that, basically when we look all around Europe, it's a mess. And it's probably a little bit of a different picture that we had when we talk about the geopolitical commission, about a ring of well-governed states. I mean, is Europe at this point well equipped to deal with all these systemic shocks? Sometimes we just hear that Europe is increasingly becoming a passive bystander.
Thank you very much, Bruno, and I want to thank the Riga conference for allowing me to be here. Unfortunately, not physically present, and I hope that will be for next time. But in any case, coming to you via VTC, and thank you for organizing this very important forum. I got some of the Breton discussion and with the minister, and I was very interested in what they had to say, and what I think it shows is also how much of these issues we need to be discussing together in such fora as the Riga conference. Listen, there's no two ways about it. Our strategic environment and context has, of course, clearly deteriorating almost by the day. What we see are crises that are accumulating without canceling each other. And I think President Biden put it very aptly yesterday in his speech, if I may, when he emphasized that we are at an inflection point. And that this is where we need the kind of unity that this administration, the Biden administration, has indeed been showing. To us, what this means, and when you indeed combine this. When you reread some of the heady rhetoric from 10, 15 years ago, you could be forgiven for a smile, if not a smirk. Of course, we see that the Ring of Friends has unfortunately become a ring of fire, and that we are surrounded from the European continent perspective by increasing instability in a 360-degree perspective, as they say at NATO, but which is the perspective that our competitors, Russia and China particularly, adopt daily. And that we are in this volatile strategic environment where in the end, and there I also concur with the current US administration, what is at stake is the future of our systems, of our democracy, democratic systems as such. So I think the next few weeks and months will be crucial, not least because in a way, vis-à-vis the US political calendar, which counts, obviously, we will be on borrowed time fairly soon, even in a very favorable scenario. So the next few months, to me, as I look at them, will be crucial to demonstrate whether we together, and Europe particularly, can be a positive factor in creating and providing security. I think we will have an interesting sequence, both commemorative with the Liberation 80, as our American friends call it, so the commemoration of the 80th anniversary of liberation of Europe, but also obviously the Washington summit that we are very much looking forward to. And in this regard, I think we can, from a French perspective, also sign up to the mantra that it's about being stronger together and not stronger apart. But of course, this togetherness and this together needs to be more than the sum of its parts. And that's where what we say about Europeans being able to pull their own weight is very important, and including as we talk about acquiring capabilities in common or being able to develop a European defense and industrial technology base. I would have very quickly three recipes for that, or three parameters that I think are very important if we want Europe to pull its weight alongside, I repeat, the Transatlantic Alliance and the United States of America and Canada. Let's not forget Canada. The first one is obviously build on the existing. I don't think we are seeking now, or I don't think we have time, frankly, for an institutional big bang. The second one is to be inclusive, and in that regard, we in France are doing everything we can, I think I can say, to promote formats in which, for example, our British friends are represented and have a voice at the table. It's the case, for example, of the European Intervention Initiative. We had a meeting this week, which was very productive. So we're not in the theological realm here, we're in the practical realm, and having everyone around the table, including our British friends, is crucially important in this respect. And the third one is obviously to work together and to keep our unity, because the cost of this unity in this very strategic environment is actually rising, and rising to a way that we cannot afford this cost. So I think as we look forward to the sequence that will take us to the Washington summit, but also to the various European sequence, what we are looking at from a French perspective is a European offer to be able to give the Biden administration to be able to for them to bolster the claim that Europeans are stepping up and shouldering their share of the burden. That is crucially important as you look at all our strategic environment, be it direction south, east, 360 degrees.
Thank you very much, Alexandre, for these remarks. And in the meantime, also welcome to Joanneke Belfort from the EAS. Thank you for joining us in Riga. I'll get back to you a little bit later. But first, maybe to you. Alexandre was talking about unity, and your government just hosted, I think 2 weeks ago, a informal meeting of head of states in Granada, in the beautiful Alhambra. So do you actually sensed back then this unity among Europeans in terms of threat perception? I mean, we all agree that we need support for Ukraine. We all agree we need to support for Palestine. But sometimes we do feel that sense of dissent. So what was the outcome actually of that meeting? Because I understood Granada was about priorities for a strong, dynamic power in Europe, right?
Exactly. So let me start. Thank you, the organization, the Riga Conference, and LATO for the invitation. and let me also start from the beginning of Granada. As you know, Spain last year was hosting a NATO summit, and it was approved. We was adopted the NATO strategic concept. And this year, this semester, We are the presidency of the Council of the EU. And one of the things that we have been focusing more is on this paradox that the European Union is a project, you could say, that is based on the idea of openness, interdependence, but the global trends that long-term trends that we are seeing is that we are going for a world of more geopolitical competition, more economic fragmentation, and U.S.-China rivalry, and this is not the world that the EU was made for. So one of our ideas as the NATO strategic concept was a way of adapting NATO to the current challenges for NATO. What we have been trying with Granada is to adapt this EU to the current challenges for the world of today. And in this, the program of the Spanish presidency of the Council of the EU, it has 4 priorities. The first one is open strategic autonomy. The second is green transition. The third is social Europe, and the fourth, it is an overall priority that is unity, and is to maintain unity in the face of the current challenges that we are facing right now as a union, and to try to push for a more common strategic space for the EU, combining those challenges looking to the east and those challenges looking to the south at the same time, both together. And for doing that, what we have been doing this semester is coordinating a report that has been published and presented by our President Sanchez 1 month ago. It's called Resilient EU 2030. It was drafted by the Spanish presidency together with the other 26 member states. And the idea of this document is to try to map the vulnerabilities and dependencies of the EU for trying to reduce that, how to develop more capabilities, and how to cooperate with third parties in order of, with third parties, third states, third organizations. The idea is how to cooperate with others in order to be more strategic. Because for Spain, open strategic autonomy is more about being strategic than being autonomous, and we really believe in openness. So I'm going to finish in a few minutes. The point is, this document is also based on energy security, economic security, critical infrastructure, security, etc. It was the base for the discussion on Granada. As you know, Granada was 2 summits. One summit is for the European political community, and the other is on the informal European Council. In the case of the informal European Council, it was approved the Granada Declaration, including some of those ideas to adapt the EU to this new world. And this is like the first stone also for the new strategic agenda of the Council, that this is something that we are discussing at the level of the Council. Plus, and this is the other thing that was included in the Granada Declaration, its enlargement was one of the main debates. And as you read the Granada Declaration, in the statement is that the enlargement is a geostrategic investment in peace, security, stability, and prosperity. So the idea is that for the very first time, the Council has approved that, and also mentioned that there's 2 sides of the coin. We need to approve, to take action and reforms on both sides. From one side is the EU should be prepared for enlargement, fit for enlargement in terms of institutions, decision-making, policies, budget, etc. And at the same time, those enlargement countries that they want to access the EU, they have also to start the reforms in order to be able to pass the 35 chapters of the acquis communautaire, etc. So the point is the 2 sides of the coin is they have to do reform, but we also have to reform ourselves as EU institutions, and this is also included in the Granada Declaration. The main idea is that if we want to be drivers, not passengers, of our geopolitical fortune, we need to take action. And maybe this is not the world that we like as Europeans. Our DNA was a more open world based on multilateral institutions or rule-based order. But if today the world is not more similar to the EU has to adapt, but also protecting our values, our way of doing things. And this is a little bit what we have been trying to do in the Spanish presidency. As you know, there's going to be another 2 European Councils this semester, especially a very important one on December, in which maybe we are going to have some news on enlargement. And as we have been focusing very much also on Ukraine and to maintain unity towards the Russian aggression towards Ukraine. And President Sanchez started the 1st of July, the semester of the presidency in Kyiv for the very first time in the Gymnich, that is the informal foreign affairs minister in Toledo. We started with Kuleba, that is the foreign affairs minister of Ukraine. The European External Action Service hosts a foreign affairs council for the first time in Ukraine, also in Kyiv, and as you know, Zelensky went also to Granada. So we have in contact with Ukrainian authorities, and our main idea is also to maintain unity in the European action.
Thank you. No, that's good to hear all the outline of what was discussed in Granada. Joanna Cabalford, I'm turning to you in Brussels. So we just hear our colleague here saying, well, we live in a world that was not really made for Europe, a world that the Europeans don't really like too much. We need to change. We need to map our vulnerabilities. But I mean, Europeans were always from Venus, Americans from Mars. There's a time that we Europeans also moved to Mars, perhaps. We've been investing a lot in a set of resilience measures. But is that really enough just to be resilient, or do we also need other tools to really be that geopolitical actor?
Thank you very much, and thank you. Sorry for being a bit late connecting. I had other time schedules in my agenda, but I'm very glad to be here and to be here virtually. I would have loved to be in Riga, but I had engagement yesterday to discuss with the EU security policy directors about the multiple crises that we're facing right now. You're right, and I think what we can sketch a world that is a world of raw power politics, if I may use that word, because it's new, it's complex, it's multi-layered. We see the crisis multiplying. It's a messy multipolarity, and that's on all levels. We're not engaged also in the kinetic war, but we have also a battle of narratives. We have cyber warfare. We are in a battle of offers with China, and we have terrorist attack of Hamas now. And so in that sense, what we need now is to balance and strengthen alliances. And that's, I think, a continuous call for the EU, and specifically, and if I may take it from my responsibilities, to strengthen its role in security and defense. But from the outset, we've been saying not alone, because partners in that sense are more important than ever. And we've seen, of course, with Russia's war of aggression, that we've been very united. And I heard Alexandra also emphasizing the importance of being united. Let me just very quickly say a few things about what we've been doing since then in the security and defense field. We've been providing support packages to Ukraine with military equipment to over 5.6 billion through the European Peace Facility. But if you count all the member states, EU member states have been doing bilaterally, we can now say that we have more than 25 billion of donations and transfers of military equipment to Ukraine by member states. Military training at large scale. We have a UMAM Ukraine military training mission. And this has been really a successful military training mission, both based in Germany and in Poland. We're looking to all varieties of training and maybe even expanding to internal security forces and F-16 training. And then the third thing I want to mention is the providing ammunition. We have an ammunition initiative for Ukraine also, with supported by 2 billion euro from that same European Peace Facility. And we are working to deliver 1 million rounds of artillery ammunition. And that's just a few examples of the demonstration that we as an EU are becoming a more capable security and defense provider. But as you rightfully said, it's broader, and I heard the mentioning of Alvaro also about the open strategic autonomy. It's not only that we need to look at this defense, but we've seen a lot of needs also to look at our dependencies and look at technologically dependencies. So what do we do there? And what we need to take as a EU is take strategic responsibility. And that means looking at the various threats that we are facing. We had our threat assessment from the first time from the EU side, but we have to broaden our resilience. And in that sense, it's the Resilient EU 2030 was mentioned, but I think this is something we have to look more carefully, not only to cyber, but also to space and all the hybrid threats that we are facing, but also the protection of critical infrastructure. And unfortunately, we've seen this recently already with the gas pipeline and telecom. There is a lot to do. Let me end with saying unity, we need to work with partners, but very much also see it through our strategic partnership from the EU with NATO. Because there we have a real advantage to look together to what we do with all those threats that we're facing. And that's not only the EU, but that's NATO in the same boat. And so we need to reinforce that partnership. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those remarks. And we'll come back to you also to the speakers online as we get questions from the audience. So please stay with us for a little longer. Don't go out. Slawomir, back to you perhaps as well. So we were talking about this issue of how Europe needs to push back on these autocracies that seek regional hegemony.
We cannot hear you very well. I'm sorry. Must be some kind of sound problem, and I think it's the same for you, Anneke.
Better now? Okay. We'll get back to you. I'm sure the team here will... Okay, great. So about how Europe should push back on these autocracies that seek regional hegemony. I mean, one of the obvious powers we're talking about here is Russia still, which is a huge issue for Europe as well. So Poland has been very instrumental also in taking the lead on pushing back on Russia. So how do you see the situation with Russia, the war in Ukraine? I mean, what's the plan here for the next year, for instance?
Well, thank you very much for, first of all, for having me here. It's always a pleasure to speak at this stage of Riga conference. So what's the role of Russian-Ukrainian war? Well, it is undoubtedly a systemic change war. I mean, the war which actually has a potential to influence the way how we live and the way how we think and the system, international system, we are strengthening, at least, we have been strengthening at least since 1989. So, and the question is how Europe is responding to this challenge. Well, let me start from taking a phrase from the title of this panel about Europe as a geopolitical actor. Is Europe a geopolitical actor? Actor? Is. Yes, we can agree with that. Europe is able to play at the world stage. Europe or European Union is able to attract attention of the audience or interact with other actors. But is Europe a geopolitical power? Is Europe capable to project force, at least to its immediate neighborhood? And the answer is no. So that's one of the ways how we can approach to your question you addressed to me about the importance of Ukraine. Europe is relevant in this matter. Europe is capable to provide financial aid. Europe is capable to generate military support, supply, and help Ukrainians to maintain the war effort. Yes, Europe is capable to do that. But these capabilities are being produced by common market. And the common market is the source of the strength of Europe. Why Europe is not a geopolitical power? Because it is this, this common market, the source of European strength, was developed and strengthened under security umbrella of another European power located outside of the continent. So we developed our well-being thanks to United States and the protection of United States. United States are absolutely essential for keeping Europe at peace. And we see now in Ukraine that without the leadership of United States, Europe would probably not be able to help Ukrainians to defend themselves. Europe is unable to defend itself. We are still relying on American presence. We are still relying on American deterrence. And this factor exposed Europe at high risk. What Russia and China are publicly saying is that they are not satisfied with the world order that Europe and the United States want to defend. So they are challenging us. And they also signal that they are willing to cooperate or even coordinate their actions in order to change the world system we'd like to defend. So is Europe doing enough to prepare itself to this kind of new geopolitical challenge? My answer is no. We are moving very slowly, and we are running out of time. Thank you.
Let me go back to you then, Ian. I mean, what Slavomir just said, I have this picture in mind where now we have a conflict in the Middle East. Immediately, the United States is sending 2 aircraft carriers. We in Europe would not be able to do such thing like that. So, as Slavomir also said, if you want to be a geopolitical actor, you also need power. You need to project force. So, the United States will probably be be more and more stretched, dealing with Russia, dealing with China, the Middle East. Are we Europeans well equipped to step in and fill this, perhaps some voids where the United States or NATO would need Europeans to step up?
Well, we're certainly needed. Are we ready? No, we're not ready. I mean, perhaps the first thing I want to do is to say, who do we mean by Europe? You know, a lot of what we've heard from Monsieur Breton, to some extent from Alexandre and others, it's Europe and the EU are viewed as exactly coterminous. I mean, I wish that was so, but actually it isn't. And for the time being, at least, the UK is still one of Europe's major defence powers, and I think one of the things that the EU has to do is to find a way to cooperate more closely with countries which are not members of the EU, but which are like-minded on many issues. I admit that I'm a slight skeptic when it comes to the geopolitical EU, because it seems to me that one of the great strengths of the EU is its normative power, the power of its values. And there's always a risk when you start talking about geopolitics that you lose sight of the values and you start thinking strictly in terms of realpolitik. There's quite enough realpolitik around in Europe, thanks to Russia in particular, but not exclusively. And I think one of the big successes that the EU has had over the decades is to project its values and to use the projection of its values as a way to secure its own space. And that's why when I'm thinking about, you know, what does the EU need to do to project secure or to protect and promote security in Europe, you know, enlargement is actually pretty near the top of my list. And we've rather lost confidence in the process of enlargement, but sitting here in one of the countries that has benefited, I hope Latvians in the audience would agree, has benefited from being included within the ambit of the EU and NATO. I think we need to regain our confidence in those as instruments of our ability to produce security.
I know I have a lot of follow-up questions, but I also want to look to you, the audience, to see if you have pressing comments or questions to ask the panel. We have roughly 20 minutes left. While you think about that, I'll get back to Paris for a moment, to Alexandre. You would like to come in?
Confusingly, I'm in Brussels as well today.
Oh, you're in Brussels too.
As you can maybe see behind me, at our permanent representation to the EU. Nonetheless, I wanted to correct something that Ian just said, because I pointedly said that we needed to keep the UK in. It's actually, and it's not a doctrinal point, it's because it's what we do day in, day out. And I mentioned the European Intervention Initiative as precisely a format that includes the UK that we met this week, and where the UK was extremely engaged. So I think we need to both reinforce from a French perspective. The EU, also NATO, by the way, in which we are engaged with thousands of personnel by now on the eastern flank, and the European construct outside of the EU that includes the United Kingdom, because we have an extremely strong defense cooperation with them, not least in Estonia, but also everywhere else.
Thank you for that. Also, our digital viewers can ask questions, so maybe I'll pick some from there as well. One question we have here: how should Europe engage with the immediate neighborhoods in the Eastern Europe and Western Balkans in the light of rising geopolitical tensions? Let me just take this question for our panelists. There's also a question about climate security, how this will basically affect our geopolitical strategy. I'll have the panelists here take note. Another question that we have from the audience here is soft power, if this still can help us to foster peace and security globally. So perhaps let me get back to the panel on this. Joanneke, you are still with us, I think, in Brussels.
Yes, I'm
Actually,
still with you, and
the issue of soft power was an interesting one. I mean,
yes.
I remember a decade ago, soft power was the key phrase for Europe. But is this still really relevant in today's, messy multipolarism?
No, and I think what I usually want to call soft power is the integrated approach. And that's not always easy, because if you look, for example, now in the situation in Sahel, we not like to look at that situation that we need to use all our different EU instruments and bilateral programs, development cooperation, to have a real good strategy to help population and protect the population over there. But that's being said as well, we have those instruments, but it's not always being used or being appreciated or being set to a good to get to the right solution for the time. So currently we're very in a very, like I said already, in a very difficult, complex world. Doesn't mean that we have to look at all those instruments at the same way. So not only I mentioned the very defense instruments, but if you look at Ukraine, we have a civilian mission there, and we've been setting up civilian missions, for example, now recently in Moldova, and that gets me to the question of the Eastern neighborhood. I think it's very important. Of course, we need to keep on supporting Ukraine, but especially now also in these times, to look at the situation, unfortunately, what has been happening between Armenia and Azerbaijan. We have a Foreign Affairs Council meeting next week with the Central Asian countries, but also the Western Balkans, as you have rightly said. Unfortunately, there as well, we see tensions between Kosovo and Serbia, but as a EU, we've been supporting those countries, and enlargement has been said is an instrument. And I think it's really, like Ian said, we need to use that instrument. And I think we are looking at it with a fresh look. Doesn't mean that it's easy, because it's not easy and it will take time, but it's one of those elements, if you talk about real promoting and projecting values and stability, indeed, that is important. And I want to make, if I make one remark also about climate security, I want to say climate security and defense, we had a joint communication coming out. I think that's one of those areas where we need to use our soft power instruments, but also look at the getting our defense industries also looking at the more carbon-free footprints and looking what we can do together to adapt and mitigate the consequences of climate change.
Thank you very much. Over to you, perhaps, if you have some thoughts on that.
So only two very fast comments. I apologize for coming back to the priorities of the Spanish presidency, but they're very much related with those questions. One on EU unity, and then this is the idea of constructing this common strategic space together with our allies, not only with the only 27 member states, but with NATO and many of our allies. And the idea is that we have not to confront East and South. In the case of Spain, we have invested very much in the eastern flank, and as you know, we have a strong presence here in Latvia under NATO. And then the idea is that we have to construct this common strategic culture that in which countries in the South will look to the threats and challenges that came from the East, but the other way around, those in the East, they have to also to look to the challenges that came from the South. And then to construct this common strategic culture together with allies is one of the priorities of the Spanish presidency. It's quite important for us and very much related with those questions. And the second is another, and very fast, is another of our priorities is green transition. And as you know, this presidency is going to be the last one that we are going to have the 6 months for before the European elections. And our idea is to close as much as dossiers that they are open under the EU legislative process, and especially in the case of Fit for 55. For example, the Council arrived to a common position on the reform of the electricity market. But the point is, green transition is key to reduce our dependency on energy from outside, and this is not only about an ecological, that is also important, but also about our security. Thank you.
I get back to you, gentlemen. I'll just take another question from the audience in the meantime. I don't know if there's microphones. Yes, there are. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Tengiz Paladze, European Center for International Political Economy. First of all, thank you to our outstanding speakers. My question is, as we are talking about geopolitics requires sustainability and continuity of politics. Next year, EU has elections, so soon we will have new parliament and new commission. So in that terms, do you see any challenges for sustainability of EU politics? Thank you.
Okay, I'll take this question. I have another question there on the row, the lady with an orange jacket. Or just there, the third row on the front.
Oh my God.
There. Maybe hand over the microphone, exactly. Teamwork.
Thank you so much. My name is Antonia Pup and I work for the Romanian Parliament. And my question is regarding, since you were mentioning the European reform and the need for us to have swifter decisions for a more consistent European security framework, I was wondering to see your opinion regarding the very hot topic, I would say, that is brought by the Western European partners regarding the modification of the European treaties in the sense of having no more vetoes, no more consensus when it comes to those sensitive topics in the European Union conversation. Do you think that it's a good decision, or on the contrary, since I think there is a serious concern when it comes to the fact that populists can bank on the fact that they don't have a veto anymore and argue that the European Union is taking decisions without consensus and against their national interest? Thank you.
Thank you. I hope we all take notes. I'll have one more question there with the gentleman that already has a microphone. Good to see you.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
This is Shota Guineria from the Baltic Defense College. And my question goes back to the question of vulnerabilities. It has been mentioned a couple of times here. And I think that how we gotten here in the first place is because we have given initiative to the Russian Federation on the conflicts in Europe and given them the ability to manipulate with the so-called gray zones, you know, starting from Transnistria, Karabakh, Abkhazia, Tskhinvali region, and then it grew into the annexation of Crimea and war in eastern Ukraine. So where we are now is that there are two possibilities. Either Russia will win, or they will, in any other, if they are not defeated in Ukraine, in any other scenario, they will be allowed to keep some sort of that gray zones to come back with more problems. So my question is there any ability or the appetite in the European Union to engage in this real issues of strategic importance and be a stakeholder there in defense and security and deal with that gray zones and conflicts? Thank you.
Okay, let me also add one question from the online audience. There was, perhaps this will be also one for you, Slavomir. It's about how the new government in Warsaw impacts the EU ability to deal with the challenges that we have discussed today. So I think we've heard some comments, some questions. I propose that we go back to the panel for a series of answers, and then by then I think our time will be over. So Slavomir, let me perhaps start with you, if you have some remarks, comments on the questions that were asked.
BTC Land cannot hear you, Riga.
Read. We have to bear in mind that we have very short time to prepare ourselves to coordinated action of China and Russia. We may not have here American troops. We may not here in Europe American air power. And Russia is looking for exactly this kind of opportunity. Soft power would not stop Russian tanks, ladies and gentlemen. We need hard power. What Russian-Ukraine war teaches us is mass matter, not the precision weapons. Precision weapons would not give us an advantage over the Russians. Russians has always restored to the big numbers. That's the source of their strength. They have always invaded neighbors using mass, and they are going to do it again. So what Europe should do is not to talk about strategies for future, but we need strategies now. We need to first generate forces, then focus on ammunition production. Another lesson from Ukraine. Ammunition stocks do matter in the war. And we have to boost our military industry because it's also a crucial asset if we want to prevail and you want to keep Europe at peace. Our division labor between the United States and Europe will be in the future following. Europeans should be responsible for conventional deterrence against Russia. We should be able to deter Russia conventionally, and we have to be able to defend ourselves in conventional domain. Americans always will be here with their strategic posture and the strategic deterrence, but without them on the ground, European peace will be and can be challenged. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for those final thoughts. Ian.
Well, I agree with more or less every word that Sławomir has said. I think actually one of the biggest risks in Europe is that we give too much power to our finance ministers. I've said once or twice in recent months that I think the finance ministers of Europe are a bigger threat to our ability to defend ourselves than anything the Russians can do. 2% is not enough. The UK is barely spending 2% now, and the trajectory is not in a good direction. You're doing much better. Latvia is doing much better. But we need to take this side of things seriously. Please don't mistake the comments that I made earlier about the importance of enlargement and so on as meaning that I don't take the defence side of things seriously. I think it's enormously serious. And whether I think there's a big war coming or not, I think it's extremely important that Europe should be able to do more for its own defence, because I also worry about some of the developments in the US domestic political scene, and I'm not sure whether we can assume that forever the US will bear the burden that it's been bearing for the last 7 decades.
30 seconds.
Well, just a footnote. Russia's defense budget for next year is 6% of GDP. And we are talking about reaching 1.5 across the Europe. Russians are getting ready for a war against us. We should not ignore them.
Let me perhaps also turn to our speakers online. I hope you were able to hear the questions of the audience. Could you also address some of the other questions that were asked? That would be great. Alexandre, over to you perhaps first.
Thank you so much. No, a lot of questions, and both in the answers, I can agree with a lot of what was said. Let me hit some top waves. To Slavomir's response and to the questions there, I agree with almost everything he said, except the division of labor point. As not surprisingly from a French perspective, we do still believe in the independent nuclear deterrent provided by the United Kingdom and France as independent centers of decision, at least for France. And therefore, that component is very much strategic and is very much a contribution to European security in our view. And by the way, we consider that nuclear deterrence has worked, including in connection with what we see on our eastern flank. The other point is about enlargement. I think what you will hear increasingly from France, President Macron in Lobsec and others, is definitely a Zeitenwende à la française as regards enlargement. And I think one of my colleagues was there in Riga to get into detail on that. That is to say, perception that this is a strategic policy, and that it's not about when or whether, but it's about how you do it and how you make an enlarged EU fit for purpose, precisely in the framework and the context that was said also by the Romanian colleague. And by the way, our position on Ukraine path towards NATO proceeds from the same strategic analysis. On hybrid, I think this is one of the prime examples, not to steal Joanneke's thunder, but on which the EU has been doing a lot, NATO has been doing a lot, and there needs to be stronger NATO-EU cooperation. There's been impressive work on the ES side with the task forces. And NATO also is wrapping its head around these issues, and precisely because it's hybrid seeks to go around traditional deterrence through lower spectrum means or things of that nature. This is a prime area for NATO-EU cooperation, and one that we will very much continue to push. And lastly, on budget, yes, absolutely. I do recall when a former chief of the Joint Chiefs, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the US, said that one of the biggest threats to US national security was the budgetary perspective a few years back. That's of course not the case anymore in the US, even though. But for us, certainly it's something that we take very seriously. This is why we adopted a military programming law that enshrines a level of spending of 413 billion euros out to 2030. And when you take the trajectory of French defense spending from 2017 to 2030, it will have been a doubling of the spending. Of course, the question is what for, and that's where the projects come in, and including what we want to do with some of our European partners, including with Germany, in the air and land domains, to make sure that we get some more bang for the buck. But I'm absolutely with Ian Bond, and I think that even for France, even with the impressive figures that I just quoted, it's going to be a big challenge, implementation and sustainability.
Thank you very much for these final ideas and thoughts. Joanneke, perhaps also from you in Brussels, a few final thoughts about the external action of the European Union.
Well, thank you. And if I can just also add that I could agree very much with all the previous speakers. Alexander mentioned the hybrid part. I think that's the one where we need to be more united and look what we can do together, more in a coordinated fashion, and it will become more and more important, especially indeed if we try to look and look carefully to all our vulnerabilities. Let me also make a remark on defense spending. This is our time, indeed. We need to, Slavomir mentioned the ammunition production. We've set out our three-track approach to actually get one part of the ammunition, the 155, especially also focused to get it for Ukraine. But this is a model we need to do more, because we keep on saying that we need a strong EU defense, but as long as all individual member states don't put at first the cooperation that they can do in this field, it will still remain a fragmented EU defense. And in that sense, we need to do more on joint procurement, but also on joint development, on getting using the instruments that we have already in place, the EU Defence Fund, and beef it up and really use instruments like permanent structured cooperation to really get all the member states work together. Because I'm not using the word strategic autonomy, but we need to at least be more strategic responsible as an EU, and because there is a need to take up this and to also work on ramping up our defense industry and what we need to do to defend ourselves. So let me just say one word about the question about the voting and the decision making. Yes, this is something we need to keep on discussing, how we can make it work quicker. If this means also for everything quality majority voting, no, I'm not saying that, but you can see a gradual approach to that. You can see maybe for certain issues that we can take a decision first with the unanimity and then have different member states pick it up, for example, on the decision making on missions or maybe on sanctions. So there are various ways that we can look where we can streamline our decision making. Thank you.
Thank you very much again. So unfortunately, this is the end of our panel. I regret there is no more time for conversation, but I do congratulate all of you, speakers and audience, for the ideas and thoughts that you did raise. What I take from this conversation is that Europe has to change for a new world, and that we need to do so in a united way. So with these thoughts, thank you very much again to our panelists for joining, and we will see all of you on the next panel.